Hi, everyone. We'll give it a couple of seconds. We'll let everybody join. We get all the streams connected. You're all very welcome. We'll get started now in a few minutes. Okay, it looks like our streams are working and everything's connected together, so we can get started now in a second. Do a wave to Colin there, one of our new people who just gave us a wave on chat. Hey, Colin. Okay, well, let's go ahead then. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name's Conor O'Neill. I'm head of product here in Nearform. You're all very welcome to Decoded. So this is a web series we've been doing for a couple of months now. And it's really focused on kind of putting technology into context, looking at real world challenges and, talking to real world practitioners who are actually building software day to day and delivering software for customers. Few little bits of, I suppose, general housekeeping. It is a webinar. You're all muted, but that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. So down the end there, you'll see, as I'm sure you're aware on Zoom, but there's a Q&A feature there. Feel free to use it throughout. We won't actually get to the questions probably until the end, but do, as stuff pops into your head as we're talking, please just pop them in there. And we've definitely given over time at the end to answer those. Just so you're aware as well, this is being recorded. It will be available. The recording will be available on nearform.com and on our YouTube channel, but it's also been live streamed on YouTube and live streamed on LinkedIn, just so that you're aware. So let's talk about today. Today is content management systems and where they're all going and what's happening with them. There's a lot of changes happening out there right now around CMSs and content in general. There's a big focus has shifted in recent years to building these very scalable kind of performance focused type systems. And, there's a lot of organizations trying to figure out, well, do they need to embrace those or how do they embrace them and so on. But, you don't want to hear from me about that. You want to hear from people who actually do this for a living. So on our panel today, we have Adrian Russo, one of our technical directors, and Ken Alstrom, who is a delivery architect here at Nearform. So they both have many, many years, I won't age them, but many, many, many years in building and customizing content management systems. And I'm really pleased to have you guys and really eager to get into it. So hello first. So hello, Ken and Adrian, how are you?
Oh, hey, Conor.
So let's start easy. Let's ease the audience in. Let's not go deep into the weeds of things. Most people, I'm sure, who are on this or watching it later, they know what a CMS is. They know some of the big names that are out there. There's obviously the big kahuna WordPress, which runs more than 30% at this stage of websites out there. But there's Drupal, there's Joomla, there's Typo3. They've all been around for a long time. But what is it? What are these sort of main frustrations that people have with these existing systems? Maybe I can put that out to you, Adrian, to kind of kick things off.
So I think one of the largest problems with these existing systems is maintainability over the long periods of time. So just because you've built a WordPress site and you put it out in the world doesn't mean that it is the last time you get to work on it, because WordPress is constantly evolving. Attacks against WordPress are constantly evolving. The plugins that you have are constantly evolving, and in and of themselves may have bugs. And just upgrading to the latest version of everything is never going to be the answer due to some of the complexity in the system. So it takes a fair amount of time to maintain a WordPress site and to keep it current. And that's not even, major version upgrades between CMSs. There's, significant, it takes a significant amount of effort to keep things up to date. And then I kind of touched on it a little bit, like security is also an issue because they are so widely distributed. They are also major targets for malware and for attacks. So that's why you have to be extra vigilant on these systems. And then another consideration with them is performance. Just a lot of them seem to be written in PHP. Others might maybe be written in other languages. And just due to how PHP works, there's a specific amount of throughput you can get in a specific amount of pages you can render per minute. And you can throw more hardware at it, sure, and you can cluster things more like differently, or you could just do something that has a different performance profile. So
they'd be your kind of top, and I think it's a good point you make there, particularly around, one of the advantages that is always said about these systems. It only takes a couple of minutes to install them, but a couple of minutes to install it, then years to manage and maintain the thing. And Ken, for you, what are there other aspects there that really make you want to think, okay, there's other ways of doing this?
Yeah, well, Adrian hit on a lot of really good ones. He mentioned quickly plugins, which I think is kind of one of the big pain points of the traditional CMSs. They're a top to bottom solution. You kind of get locked into a single ecosystem, and then they offer you all of these different plugins for, do you want a calendar? Do you want to add comments? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And these plugins are maintained by third parties or not maintained by third parties. You want a WordPress calendar, you have 372 options, but 368 of them are terrible, and you don't know which ones. And so you have all of these amazing abilities within a single ecosystem, but they are very fragile and fall apart very fast, and you're locked into that entire stack. You take that into the future as well with the evolution of interfaces. WordPress started out where we had the computer screen. I think WordPress might have even predated the iPhone. And now, sure, you've got the mobile screen, and we all know that talking about mobile first is old. But we've also all now got watches, and your fridge can give you a display. And what about Alexa and having a voice interface instead of a visual interface? You have these traditional CMSs that are all locked into, here is your one display option on the web.
And with a sort of, not necessarily a monolithic architecture, but a monolithic view of the world. Here's the whole thing in one. Okay. Yeah. I hadn't really thought about the interface side of things, particularly Alexa. It's interesting now. And the plugin thing, I think, and not to particularly pick on WordPress, but we've all been there with those types of systems, with the 4 SEO, let's install the 4 SEO plugins and hope they don't interfere with each other, and, magically exactly. my site will be popular. So, as I said, people know about the WordPresses, the Drupals, the Joomlas, and so on. And they start, they're at this point now thinking, maybe I'm hearing about new stuff in new ways. And, you start Googling this stuff, and very, very quickly what you land on is this phrase, which seemed to just pop up out of nowhere, which was Jamstack. So, I mean, maybe let's just dig a little bit into what that actually is, like even what it stands for. Do I need a jazz flute to take part in this whole Jamstack thing? Is it actually new? Ken, do you want to go on that one as well?
Sure. I mean, I would say that the concept of Jamstack is pretty modern, but it utilizes some older technologies that are repackaged. It centers around kind of 4 main things. You've got JavaScript, you have a static site generator, you have a headless CMS, and you have a CDN. The concept of it is essentially utilizing these 4 tools to get better performance, better faster, cheaper scaling, higher security, and a more friendly developer experience. making it really, really basic, what we do is you'll use a static site generator to generate a whole bunch of content. Let's say you have a blog post. On your site, you have a blog post, you've got a header, you've got a menu that goes around the site, you've got an article, and let's say on the right side, you've got a widget that shows the top 10 blog posts on your blog. With the static site generator, it will statically build, beforehand, the header, the menu, the article, and the footer that will never change. And then the top 10 blog posts, that's going to dynamically change. And let's pretend you have a tremendous amount of traffic and that can change very quickly. So we utilize JavaScript with that in combination with the static site generator to just generate the kind of frame around the top 10 widget, and then JavaScript asynchronously requests new and dynamically the latest top 10 list. So you've generated most of the page. We've utilized JavaScript to make it look dynamic and keep it up to date. And then we just deploy all of the assets through a CDN so that they load faster.
Okay, so in essence, there's each individual piece has been around for donkeys. So what
Sure.
they're kind of, I presume, kind of conceptually just trying to pull this together. So I suppose people can get their head around it. That what is it? This is all about. So now that's also interesting. So talking about the best of both worlds. So and is that Adrian, you've been involved in CMSs for many years. Is it new? Is it new, old? Like what,
It's actually not. It's not new at all. It's just even the first really popular CMS or blogging tool back in the day was a tool called Typepad. It used a very similar mechanism where it was a bunch of pull scripts that would read a bunch of files and generate a bunch of static HTML that it would upload to a web server. It's always been kind of another way that you could do it, but it fell out of favor as all of these advanced tools, such as the WordPresses and the Drupals became evolved and became the lingua franca of building websites on the internet. But what changed is that the client became a lot more powerful. I mean, what you could do with a static web page in 2003 versus what you can do with a static web page in 2021 is significantly different. I mean, like there's an entire art and entire science into the front end development. And we're also, blessed with many different APIs and a good understanding of how to build them so that we can build distributed systems that don't all have to kind of be in a single silo. We can take a little bit from this system, we can take a little bit from that system, and kind of combine it all on the client, which is what 20 years of technological advances provided us with.
But that's
and that's really where I guess the new part of Jamstack is this extra powerful JavaScript and client side merged with the older technologies, really.
And that's a genuine insight moment for me there, because I was sort of in my head treating it as quite a sort of a repackaging or a Back to the Future kind of idea, but it's that piece of okay, it's the power of the front end that yes, you're taking existing tools and existing approaches, but you can do so much more now because you have the kind of front end engineering capabilities you didn't have before. So I'm walking away now knowing something I didn't know at all. Like I was clueless on it. This is great. Now, again, as I said, you Google, you find Jamstack. The other thing you hit very, very quickly when you read any articles about this is specific tools. And, we're a professional services company. We're not selling anybody tools. We're not saying, use ToolX because we'll get a kickback. But you do see Gatsby mentioned a lot. Do one of you want to dig into why that is? What is Gatsby? Why is it so popular? Why is there so much written about it? Who wants to?
I mean, really, we could say Gatsby. It is a static site generator. It's built in JavaScript. It's a JavaScript framework, and it provides that kind of boilerplate for you to just put a static site up and get it running in moments. It's received great support from the developer community. It has a lot of available developer plugins. We spoke about plugins before with WordPress. These are developer plugins, which kind of live in a different sphere from user plugins. Would you say that's correct, Adrian?
Yes, the user plugins, these wouldn't necessarily provide actual interface to the clients or to users. Right. It's more about providing extra capabilities like support of additional database backends or a variety of other things. It increases the flexibility of the platform.
Yeah. And it's React based, am I right in saying that?
Let's just say that it's very easy to work with it in React.
Okay, all right. Nicely put, okay.
So, it has a lot of really good capabilities. For example, one of the traditional difficulties with static site generation is that anytime you create new content, you have to completely rebuild your site. And so for a casual blog poster, it doesn't matter too much if it takes an hour for your new blog post to come up live online. If you're a breaking news organization, that's a huge problem. Gatsby has things like incremental building that makes kind of rebuilding the site fast and makes keeping that static content available very quickly. They also have things like progressive image loading. This is something they're very proud of, as well as responsive image loading that can help with slow internet connections or mobile devices and things like that.
Oh, very nice. No, the speed thing, even as an old blogger, I'd be obsessed with that. So my little blog, I switched to Hugo because it could, spit out 700 pages in 10 seconds. And it's like, oh, that's me sold. I don't care about any of the other features. The fact that it's templating language is not great, is irrelevant to, little old blogger me. And again, I feel a little bit like we're kind of, hitting on very, very hot tech, but it is important. And again, in the context of these systems and in the context of Gatsby, the other thing that then bubbles up is GraphQL. As he trips over his own tongue, specifically in the context of CMSs, why would people think, find GraphQL useful and a thing that they want to kind of get involved in?
So at risk of speaking too much and, not letting Adrian's genius be shown, I'll take a few seconds on introducing GraphQL.
Okay. Then we'll head over.
Yeah. But really, traditionally, when speaking with databases, we've dealt with a whole bunch of individual database languages, and every database kind of has its own language. There's even variations between SQL-based systems like MySQL and PostgreSQL or Postgres are slightly different and require slightly different queries. Google BigQuery is another SQL base that has other slightly different queries that you have to learn a little bit about. And it's about directly speaking with the database. We don't want to directly speak with databases anymore. We like to speak with APIs. GraphQL is not your database query language, it's your API query language. And that's a good distinction to make and a good way to explain it. It's your API query language. GraphQL goes and asks the API to give you the data that you want. The API is connected to the different databases and can be connected to a multitude of data sources and return to you a query that touches all of them. Which is also another great advantage. In fact, really the two biggest advantages of GraphQL are the ability to query multiple data sources with one query and one language, and your ability to somewhat reconstruct your data into more kind of, I'll call them business objects, In a database, you'll often store, various information about a user in different database tables, and you'll have to have a complex query to link everything together and bring it out into the program. With GraphQL, you can set an object that is the user that can have data even from multiple different data sources. But when the developer is asking the API for a user, it just asks GraphQL, GraphQL grabs it and gives them back the user, and it's that simple.
Okay, I can see the value in that, and Adrian, Ken mentioned Postgres there, and I know we don't want to go way down deep, but I know one of the tools we use a lot internally in Nearform is Hasura. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Hasura. What is that, and why as a developer would you be looking at something like Hasura?
So Hasura is a tool that we've discovered while we were doing some content management projects, and it's actually quite a breath of fresh air, because as a backend developer, as a software developer, a lot of what you're doing is you are building an API translation layer that is taking input from the front end, converting it into a query, sending it to this database server, getting the results, formatting them, and putting them back. Hasura is a very generic layer, a very generic GraphQL server that sits in front of a Postgres database that exposes your Postgres database schema as a GraphQL server. So by defining your database tables, you kind of get a head start on the entire GraphQL implementation, and it allows you to get away without writing a custom backend for more applications. It won't be suited for every project, but there are certain projects where you can actually you can get a lot of mileage without having a backend at all.
Nice.
So when you start looking at serverless and those kinds of things, although it is a bit of a misnomer because you are going to need a Hasura server,
right.
But it does give you a fair amount of flexibility there. And it has a bunch of really useful functionality like authentication layers and permissions and things that you generally are going to need.
Yeah. But that particular point, it's not like with everything we're talking about here, it's not like you're given a blank sheet of paper and off you go. Like being the complete polar opposite of the existing CMSs, you are given help. There are there are shortcuts and ways of making your life easier with these kind of toolkits, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I will generally put a Jamstack site up in 2 hours.
What?
Now,
I really thought the next word was going to be weak. I really did think the next word was that.
Let me specify that I'm talking about something very conceptual and just, I can make a post, not the entirety of Facebook.
No, I honestly, I didn't realize that's the time scale. So you were talking about it. So, right. Well, first of all, you have to sit down and figure out X, Y, Z, but like 2 hours is phenomenal as a starting point. And not so I suppose we don't completely make it, all about Gatsby all the time. Adrian, there's obviously lots of these types of systems out there. Next.js is one we hear mentioned a lot as well. Is there anything it does that's very different from Gatsby, or better than, worse than? What are your thoughts on that?
I think Ken actually has more experience working with Next.js than I do.
Sure. I do. I have built a couple of projects with Next.js, and really, I think your difference between Gatsby.js and Next.js is going to be primarily based around the native support of Next.js for server-side rendering. And if we want to, basically server-side rendering is still dynamic rendering of data. You're still dynamically fetching the data. You're not loading an already statically built page, but the data is being built and rendered on the server. which in a JavaScript world, where a lot of the work is done in the client, that's kind of something worth calling out. If you talked to a PHP developer and said, oh yeah, it's server-side rendering, they'd look at you and say, of course, everything is server-side.
Yes.
But JavaScript is natively client-side, which allows it to do all of these dynamic calls and refresh your page without you actually refreshing and all of that. But it does require a little bit of extra, skill to create a server-side render, which Next.js just drops in. So Next.js handles very well static site generation, which is already pre-built pages, and server-side rendering, which allows you to have dynamic content that's not yet been regenerated statically to display very easily. It's kind of a little bit of a hybrid there.
Sorry, go on, Adrian.
So in the example that you had before of the top 10 blog posts, you would basically be able to do that on the server side as well, and just dynamically render a page for however many users and then cache it for a certain amount of time.
Exactly.
So it would do the query once instead of 100 times for every time someone loads it.
Exactly.
I think we should do a separate webinar on server-side rendering, and we bring in Matteo Collina, who will spend the entire session telling us why it's a bad idea. If you're watching, Matteo. So we're flying through time here. God, we're barely got a list of questions that I want to ask you. So let's say somebody wants to make a move. They're looking to either transition over to a new system, or a full new build of a new system. What are the kind of top considerations that they need to look at when they're kind of making these technology decisions around kind of next-gen CMSs?
I think the first question that they need to ask themselves is whether they have any content that needs to be behind a layer of authentication. Because when you have a static site generator that is, just a bunch of static files that are on a web server somewhere, anybody can read those unless you go to quite some length to try and block them off from being able to read the files that you published. And then, if you're doing that, then you're going to need a server to do the authentication to, decide whether or not to share the page with someone. So there's a disconnect there in, whether or not you need to have pages behind a paywall or authentication, and it becomes trickier, and you have to, you have to do a bit of exercise to actually get some of those features back and some compromises.
Gotcha. And Ken, for you, what are the things people need to think about?
Well, anytime somebody is thinking about doing something or making a switch, I always go back to say, consider your goals. What are you trying to accomplish? And not in the sense of, oh, I'm trying to accomplish more speed and page loading. What is trying to get a faster page load speed trying to accomplish? What are your business goals? What are your aspirational goals? And is your current solution meeting that? And if not, why? And a lot of times when you start asking why, you don't get very far down that path before, needing to speak with a tech expert. I'm available. But really, start with your goals. Yeah. And then go to, am I meeting them? And if not, what do I need to do to meet them? And that can inform you on whether or not you need to make a switch and how you need to make that switch.
Yeah, so it's we all suffer from the shiny. Let's rebuild it all using the latest and greatest tools. And like there's obviously, back to your goals thing, there's obviously a whole scale thing there as well, in terms of, we've talked about it before, what's right for the New York Times is not necessarily right for you. You may not need Kafka in the background, handling everything if you're a blogger. And I think that goals idea should inform everything that people are doing with this, because they may actually decide not to go with these newer systems that actually sorry, go on.
I'm sorry for interrupting, but here's another thought. You might be as big as or bigger than the New York Times. You might be BMW, but you have this front-facing, public-facing site that is entirely open to the public, filled with largely static content. You're not releasing new car models every month, you're releasing them every year. And in that type of a situation, you might be huge, but you still just need kind of the more small Gatsby solution. Now, I don't work for BMW. I don't know what their actual needs are, but it's a quick example of something where you might be huge and have very static content, or you might be small. You might be a local newspaper who thrives off of Twitter and live breaking news because you're in Las Vegas, Nevada, where something's always happening. Sorry, I'm from the US, so Las Vegas.
That's a great example. Like there is always something happening in Las Vegas.
yeah. And so you might really need all of this very dynamic content in the same way that the New York Times might. It's
a very good point. And Adrian, I hate saying I keep referring to how many CMSs you've built over the years, but given what you know now, the classic question, could you have, of all those older systems, could you have built them differently back then with the tools that are available then? Looking back at how things have kind of transpired over the years.
I think that when I first started working with CMSs, like they were the new shiny, and I wanted to use them for everything, and then only after several years of working on CMSs did I come to a point where I realized that, just because I can doesn't mean I should. So on evaluation of the previous sites that I built, it turned out that maybe 1 or 2 of the 12 or 15 of them actually needed to be a traditional CMS, and the rest of them could have worked completely fine as a static site generator. It really comes down to how many people are reading the content versus how many people are creating the content and how frequently it's updated. Like, the one site that I worked on was a community blogging site, so there were hundreds of people like writing content all the time, and that really suited the tool that I was using at the time, Drupal. So that was a great example of the use case. But maybe, as for Ken's example, building the new BMW site, may not have been the best use for WordPress or something like that, because it doesn't get updated frequently. You don't have 100 editors that are constantly creating content for it. So it's good to evaluate what your goals are, as per Ken's earlier feedback. If you're not publishing things that frequently, you don't need as much of a public publishing infrastructure.
Yeah, and I know we've mentioned it in the past. I think we have the case study up on our website, but we have the example, with Conde, where their challenge wasn't, performance. The goal was to consolidate many worldwide sites into one place, and that's actually the project we executed on. So it had nothing to do with kind of switching to the newer tools. But that thing of scale, again, I shouldn't obsess about it, but it was some of those issues around that I think people sometimes forget. We think about, let's say, obviously permission systems and so on, but you guys have mentioned things like kind of asset management and royalties for imagery, and are there lots of things like that organizations have to consider that maybe the rest of us haven't really put that much thought into?
I think one of the main ones there is workflow management. So if you have a situation where a piece of content needs to be published, but say it's a press release, and you need to have an auditable chain to show that this person had approved it, and then that person approved it, and then it was published here, and then other considerations like that. especially in regulated industries where, you're actually going to get, there's repercussions for putting something out as a company, and someone needs to be on the line for the content that gets generated.
So go on.
It gets complex very fast.
Yeah, particularly I'm thinking with workflow, because final use this one, final version 7.docx is probably not the way to do your workflow if you're in a regulated industry. But I think we all know that there are people still working like that. And we have talked tech, we've talked about understanding your goals, but presumably there are people issues as well with things like this. Like, what are the types of people issues that you have to consider if you're looking at these tools?
So one of the things is that you're going to go into this with the people that you have in your team. And before you consider that you are changing a tool, you have to consider, the team members that are going to be building it. You can't just change the tool because it's new shiny. If you have an office full of PHP developers, their first project that is completely different is going to, take them some time to adapt and may fail. And you still then have to staff your team for the longer term to still be able to maintain the software. So it might force you to make a change to the DNA of your development teams.
Yeah.
So,
and it's funny you mentioned that, and I just had all of these flashbacks from working at a news organization and having reporters and editors come up to me and say, where did my shiny button go? Why can't I do this thing right now? And that's another consideration to make. You have to consider the skills of your development team. You also have to consider the flexibility of the people who will be using the CMS to create content.
Yes, that is an issue, particularly where's my shiny button gone? You get used to a workflow. Somebody somebody optimizes your workflow without checking in on you first, and it's not optimal for you. We're racing up against time here, so I suppose there's two things. We get to questions in a minute, but we do want to mention, and as we always say, we're not trying to sell you anything on this, but we do, in each of these webinars to date, we've kind of referred to an accelerator that we've done. And these are things we've built for ourselves that are mostly open source, that kind of facilitate, us in a particular area. So the one in the area of content is called Orion. Can you summarize for me what it is, why it exists, and what it's trying to achieve?
Sure. Well, with Orion, we've had clients who genuinely needed content creation, content presentation. And so we have created kind of a marriage between the Gatsby static site generator and some dynamic content fetching with GraphQL. We do use Hasura, which we talked about before, all within kind of an AWS cloud native architecture. And it helps us to have a hybrid content solution that's statically generated content with controlled user access, instantly published content, and really we've even been able to create kind of I guess you could say paywall blocked content based on user membership. So it's kind of a hybrid solution that takes the CMS into a modern place with all of the scalability, the serverless concept, the static site generator with Gatsby.js.
Nice. Adrian, do you want to add to that?
It was essentially the fact that we had a lot of considerations that needed to be built into this project that would traditionally have made a static site generator not the correct answer for the problem, but we were able to develop a solution that I think elegantly gave us the benefits without the drawbacks, but it was a fair amount of work.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, these are none of these are throwaway projects for sure. And actually on that, if people are watching, there Sean's popping links in there to the various things, so there's just information on them. But it's about learning, as I said. It's not, there is not a there's not a buy now button there anywhere on it. We'll do Q&A in a second, so if there's more questions, people have more questions, and there's a few in there, pop them into the Q&A. I will, but before that, kind of get, and people hate me for asking this, not the people, the panelists hate me for asking this, but if you were to give people a tip, a single tip for someone possibly starting on this journey, what would it be? Ken, to you first.
Oh, for me first, I'm going to go back to goals. Find out what you want abstractly, and build downward from there. Because if you keep your singular purpose in mind, you will keep yourself on track, and you will use the technologies that you need, not get distracted by something shiny here or there, and come up with a successful result.
Nice. And Adrian?
I think that as you are designing any system or any application, you should focus on building something that is simple rather than using something that is easy, because something that is simple remains easy, or remains simple to understand over long periods of time, and will get you further in the long run. So even if your initial development takes a bit longer, that whole thing of, I can install WordPress or whatever, and with a couple of clicks I had something up, that's easy. Something simple is static HTML files on a folder somewhere that doesn't have a lot of moving parts. And, in my experience, you'll get a lot further in the long term with something that is simple than something that is easy.
I love that. I'm going to live by that motto from now on. We have a couple of questions. So first of all, what does the panel think about headless CMSs in practice?
It's an essential part of the Jamstack. A headless CMS essentially is your back-end content creation with APIs that are grabbed by your front-end static site generator or server-side rendering. It's an absolutely essential part of the Jamstack, and I think headless CMS is the way to go, especially with all of the various different interfaces we have. We talked about voice interfaces before.
Mm. Yeah, there's my Christmas. I just said Christmas. There's my Christmas project. I'm in the wrong year.
No, there are definitely wrong headless CMSs, but I won't name names.
Also worth to note that even the traditional CMSs are evolving towards headless CMSs because of the ecosystem and the market that they need to play in. There's I don't even really know the Drupal world, but there's a significant push towards having a headless profile where lots of people can where you can use Drupal to edit the content, but pull it in from all the other interfaces that you want. So it's and I know that WordPress also did something similar. That's how their new editor worked that they launched recently. It's essentially WordPress is a headless CMS, and the editing interface is a tool built on top of it.
Yep.
So the approach, I think, is completely valid and is just the direction that things are moving in.
Okay. And then another one there is, how do the panel see the use of serverless JavaScript like Cloudflare workers adding dynamic content to the CMS's static content in practice? So is that, Ken, what you were talking about with the...
Yeah. It's really, I guess it depends on which serverless service you're going with. You can jump on AWS, you can jump on Google Cloud Platform, you can jump on a few others. And really, that's the secret of having statically generated dynamic sites, is you statically generate as much as possible, and through asynchronous API calls back to either your server or your serverless functions, like webhooks combined with lambdas or something like that, you are getting the dynamic data that you need to get.
Yeah. Ironically, like even if you go back to the prehistory, like how nothing is new under this earth. It reminds me a lot of edge-side includes, which had a lot of movement back in the early 2000s, where you could embed tags in your code and then you would be able to inject stuff on the server side.
Yeah,
I think it's a valid like it's a valid use case for a fair amount of things. I can, for instance, user tracking or other things that you might want to embed in pages. I can see that being a very good, useful. So yeah, it's completely valid.
Bring back widgets. That's what I say. It's,
Java
like if we can achieve anything today, it's bring back widgets. Guys, we are slap bang out of time. Thanks a million for this. I have learned so much. I hope the audience has as well. I hope the future audience does once they do the playback on YouTube and LinkedIn. As I said, I hope everybody else found it valuable as well. Now, just to let people know, if you're listening live or you're listening in the next couple of days, next week we're doing a very special joint episode of the Decoded webinars and the Open Hive.js podcast series. So what we're discussing is actually what you can expect. Given that we recently had the 25th anniversary of JavaScript, and we've spent a lot of today talking about JavaScript, what can we expect for the next 25 years of JavaScript? So it's a small ask on the panel to predict what's going to happen in a programming language for the next 25 years. But for that episode, we'll have James Snell from Nearform, we'll have Matteo Collina, we'll have Anna Henningsen, and we'll have Eric Lewis. I mean, that's, we're talking JavaScript and React superstars out there. So it will be live, same time, same place. I'll be the person who knows nothing, asking the questions. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks again, Adrian and Ken, and hope to talk to you both very, very soon.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks so much. Cheers all.